Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today Dr. Osler. He is a trauma surgeon. He's an epidemiologist. He's become an avid researcher and statistical analyst relative to COVID and some of the things that we're going through right now. And he is also an entrepreneur. He has created a company really looking at how do we sit and support the back, the spine, so that we don't have some of the problems that we have. And Dr. Osler, before we get started, if you could just share a little bit more about your background and how you got onto this journey that you've been on, because it certainly is quite a journey. And then we'll go from there in terms of some of the things you've done.
No, it's been interesting that, my career just kind of generates itself, one thing leading to another. I majored in neurophysiology at Princeton as an undergraduate, and then went to medical school at the Medical College of Virginia, and I did a surgery residency, got interested in trauma, and became an academic trauma surgeon for 10 years at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, where they have a very active knife and gun club. We did a lot of trauma surgery. And then another 10 years here at the University of Vermont, where pretty much people don't shoot and stab each other. It's a little more sedate. But people still wreck their cars and get burned and fall out of trees. So a pretty busy career as a trauma surgeon. But then I got a master's degree in biostatistics and a grant from the NIH for a few $1 million, and I started studying how we could decide which trauma centers were the most effective, learn from the best, and maybe help the laggards catch up. So I got interested in the epidemiology of trauma and mathematical modeling and that sort of thing, which took up another 10 years. But as I started doing that kind of computer work, I found myself sitting a lot. As a surgeon, I'd been up and around, the OR, the ICU, the clinic, off to the ER, back to the OR, kind of stuff. But when you sit all day writing computer code and reading and thinking, boy, my back started to kill me. And I thought, well, I've been to medical school, I can figure this. It turns out there's almost no research, and none of it any good, about why people have back pain. So I took a deep dive and discovered that mostly it's because our chairs are really bad. And I started looking around for better chairs, and there really weren't any. So I thought, okay, fine, we'll just make one, which is sort of a preposterous thing for a guy who's spent his whole life in an operating room sewing up gunshot wounds. But I'm lucky that I live in Burlington, Vermont, and there's a very active makers community. And I was embraced when I showed up with an idea by people who knew far more about how to make stuff and how to manufacture stuff, and crucially, how to manufacture stuff in a way that was sustainable, both ecologically and economically. So we set up a little company and started making chairs that make people sit better. And it's kind of tough love, by causing people to balance while they sit. They engage their core, their posture gets better, and crucially, they're moving the whole time. We as human beings have been hunter-gatherers for the last 3 million years, and so our evolutionary background requires, uniquely among primates, that we exercise every day. Bonobos, chimps, gorillas, orangutan, all these other cousins of ours are fine just sitting around all day cracking nuts and then lumbering up into a tree at night. But humans, when we took the fateful step out onto the savannah, became hunter-gatherers, and our biochemistry came to expect that we would walk miles a day, maybe many miles a day. Worked fine for 3 million years, but then in the last 100 years, we all sat down, and first, in offices, and now in home offices, staring into a pixelated screen. And it turns out that's catastrophic for our metabolism, for our posture, And it's generated two epidemics: an epidemic of back pain. 80% of America at some point in their lives develop back pain, and an epidemic of what we call sitting disease. It's a constellation of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease that really is taking 2 or 3 years off of everyone's life. If you just sit slumped in front of a computer 8 hours a day, as is the norm, you're losing years of your life. It's really an epidemiologic emergency that's hiding in plain sight. And you may have heard that sitting is the new smoking. And the analogy is quite strict. Smoking was just normal. Everybody smoked in the 50s. Doctors smoked, everybody. So it was hard for anyone to see that smoking was killing people. And even the biostatisticians, Emil Fischer, the most famous biostatistician of the last century, was famously a smoker and said he didn't think you could prove that smoking caused lung cancer. Well, with a little better math and a little more research, yeah, it's terrible for people, and not just lung cancer, emphysema and heart disease. So now we know that smoking was a catastrophe, hiding in plain sight, normalized because everyone was doing it. Just so with sitting. We think office chairs are normal because everybody sits in one 8 or 10 hours a day. It's normal, right? No, it's not normal. We were hunter-gatherers for 3 million years, and this last 100 years has been kind of a science fair project gone catastrophically wrong. So anyway, we set out to try and solve that problem by providing chairs that would fundamentally change people's relationship to sitting, making it more like walking.
So tell us about that. How did you go about that?
Well, how do you go about that? You have the idea that moving is just so much better than sitting still. So how do you get people to move while they sit still? Well, you just make a chair surface that moves. And so then they have to constantly rebalance themselves. Not big motions, but motions that require the use of big muscles, the internal and external oblique, the transverse cellulus, the multifidus, big muscles that are responsible for your posture. The chair industry took the approach of, you need to be more comfortable, and so you need to be supported. So we'll give you a backrest, a headrest, lumbar support, armrest, footrest, a headrest, all these supports from the outside, which of course result in people sitting kind of slumping on the different parts of the chair in weird ways. If you get rid of all that stuff, it turns out the human body has built into it perfect ergonomics in its skeleton. So if you let people balance their skeleton on their ischial tuberosities, on their sitting bones of their pelvis, they immediately figure out what to do with the rest of their body, and their posture within 60 or 90 seconds really reverts to almost perfect posture. And not only because their posture is good, their back pain goes away. Also, because they're now using muscular strength to organize their posture, they're burning glucose, their metabolic rate goes up by about 20%, and their overall metabolic health gets better. Their good cholesterol goes up, their bad cholesterol goes down, their insulin goes down, their all-cause mortality goes down, which is huge for epidemiologists.
So just changing how you sit makes all that difference.
No, it's astonishing. And the thing is, as a physician, we say, okay, if I could just write a prescription for one thing for everybody, I'd write for exercise, right? Exercise is just so good. We've known this for 2,000 years. Hippocrates, walking is man's best medicine. We've known this. But it's very hard to get people to exercise. No amount of begging or cajoling or texting or apps will get many people to exercise. And even if people make the commitment, they have to do it every day. I have to go running today. I have to get over that hurdle tomorrow and go running. I have to get over that hurdle the next day. But if you just change your chair, that's one decision. And now you get exercise every day. It's just built into your day.
So one of the things that I was reading in your biography is you talk about back pain being in $100 billion industry. Is that correct?
No, it's shocking. You think, how can that possibly be? I mean, $100 billion, that's right up there with cancer and heart disease. But it turns out that 80% of America has back pain at some point. And if you multiply anything by 80% of the population, you get you get huge costs. More than that, back pain is a pretty expensive thing. Missed work, repeated appointments with a chiropractic. Back surgery is, any surgery is expensive, and back surgery, as much or more. And back surgery gone wrong can be catastrophically expensive and result in a lifetime of agony. If your back surgery doesn't go well, you don't get to go back to where you were. You get to go back to the back that some orthopedic surgeon has constructed. And it's really a huge problem because the vertebrae are brilliantly designed to stack one on top of another. If you do a spinal fusion so that two vertebrae no longer move with respect to each other, now all of the movement that used to be there that's been fused out of the system has to happen at the joint above and the joint below. So those joints get extra stress in a way that they're not designed for. So the whole business of, we'll just fuse this one, it's not that simple. You're much better off getting optimal use out of your spine rather than trying to, hammer rods into it.
Part of what I'm hearing you say, Dr. Osler, is in a sense, with the right position, with the right stimulation to the large muscles in your body, you can take back pain, which often we think of as being chronic, and reverse that. Is that correct?
Right. If you can teach people better postural habits and give them better core strength, their back pain often just goes away. This is common variety musculoskeletal back pain. If you have metastatic prostate cancer, that's a different kettle of fish. But that's not most back pain. If you look at back pain, most of the time there is nothing wrong that we can find with a CT scan or an MRI or any of that stuff. It's solely the result of misusing one's back, and therefore developing pain because the spine is stressed in a way it's not accustomed to. So if you can just free people's posture from the support that they're being forced into by standard office chairs, let their naturally perfect posture express itself, and then let them sit like that for a few hours a day until their core strength comes back to them, most people kind of will do fine. And, I'm shocked at how well this has worked. I'm a lifelong academic researcher. I've got 300 papers on my CV. I review for half a dozen surgical journals and have a master's in biostatistics. And when I started getting emails from people saying, this is like night and day, my back pain is gone. I have a natural skepticism because, I know I want to believe it. Right. And so, I was really troubled by just exactly how enthusiastic people were about this. But after a while, you kind of get used to the fact that, it actually is true. That said, we don't have any double-blind crossover studies because those are immensely time-consuming and very expensive. But we've got such strong anecdotal evidence now that I really do believe it.
I think with a lot of what we have in terms of product development, it tends to be anecdotal. And so...
and even in the world of, research and biostatistics, we wryly say to each other, if you throw a brick out the window and it falls up, that's very interesting, even if it only happens once. So sometimes, looking at the anecdotal things can open a window or a door onto much more standard research.
So here's the other thing that fascinates me about what you're talking about. You can increase, did you say metabolic rate by 20%?
Right. No. So when people just slump, if you put electrodes into their muscles, they just go dark. There's just nothing happening, right? Because they're not doing anything. Typically, if you put an electrode in and hook it up to a sound system, you hear pop, 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 which is the sound of neurons and muscle cells firing. But if you just slump, all of your muscles go dark. This is catastrophic because your muscles aren't just motor units that move your bones around. Your muscles are incredibly complicated biochemical machinery, and they're constantly producing transmitter molecules and regulating your milieu intérieur. And so those who exercise, have lower bad cholesterol, higher good cholesterol, lower insulin, because their muscles are constantly rejiggering their internal biochemistry. And we know this from studying the few hunter-gatherers that are left on Earth, Hadza in Tanzania, have been extensively studied. And it's fascinating, really. They don't have chairs, right? And they certainly don't have office chairs because they're hunter-gatherers, right? But when you study them and put accelerometers on them, they spend just as much time lounging around as people in Manhattan, any Manhattan office space. So what's the deal? Well, the deal is that when the Hadza are lounging around, they're squatting. And when people in an office building are lounging, they're slumped. And squatting requires that you balance over your feet. And so the big muscles are constantly in use, just in a more restful position than standing. So we had the idea that squatting isn't really available to most Westerners anymore. Kids, babies, and kids squat quite easily, but by sitting in by being confined, you might almost say, to Western chairs, people lose the ability to squat. However, everybody can still sit actively because it's basically a seated posture, but with a slight tweak to the chair that makes it move.
So you've developed this chair to really address these issues. It's in production at the moment. You sell them. How do people purchase them? Where are they available?
So we're exclusively. This is the 21st century. We're exclusively online, unless you happen to live in Burlington, Vermont, and then we'll drop one off. And we do that. We dropped off 20 chairs with Vermont Public Radio and 25 chairs with Burton snowboards, and just people too. So if you're in Burlington, we could just drop one off for you. But if you're anywhere else, we put it in a box and we mail it to you. We have help with that now. A company called Manufacturing Solutions Incorporated in Morristown, Vermont, about an hour from where I'm sitting, takes our chairs and puts them in boxes, slaps a label on them, and off they go. So we've sold we're on track to sell $1 million worth of these things this year. So we're a profitable company here in Burlington, Vermont, with something we designed and make in Burlington.
Price points are about where with your chairs?
Our goal is to make these things so goddamn cheap everybody can have one. That's the epidemiologist in me. Now, I have friends who are part of our chair enterprise, and they sternly admonish me that we have to make a profit, or because if we go out of business, we can't help anyone. So there's always this tension between me trying to give things away and other people trying to keep me from putting us into penury. But so the price point is $350, with the idea that if we can get more efficiencies of scale, we can drive the price point down. That said, way cheaper than going to your chiropractic a couple of times, and we're way cheaper than any other active chair on the market because that's our company DNA. Our goal is to change the way the world sits, and we'll make money. I'm not too worried about that.
Here's what's interesting. You take a look at what the health clubs did and getting health partners. There's some other groups that have will pay for your membership if you will use the health club X number of times a week because they've discovered that it actually makes people healthier and they cost less to the insurance company.
But only if they go.
Only if they go, and if actually when they go, instead of going to the lounge and working on the computer, they're actually exercising, because I know people who do that also. They get their price break, but they're not exercising. So, but what I'm fascinated by is if indeed your metabolism goes up, back pain decreases or is minimized, and you decrease the cost of healthcare, it is something that actually could be very interesting to a lot of insurance companies as a way of dealing with some of the chronic problems.
Sure.
So,
And businesses too. The average business spends $200 per employee per year on back pain. So if you could solve that problem for them, you would have done them a great service.
and now, Dr. Osler, with people sitting at home and working, at least in the past, you had to get in the car and drive to the office and walk from the parking lot to your office. Today, you don't have to do that.
No, it's a catastrophe.
Actually, the amount of exercise perhaps has decreased. I don't know.
No, it's a catastrophe. But what we found, amazingly, is that with the COVID-19 shutdown, the number of chairs ordered off our website has gone way up. As people are trapped in their home offices and say, "Oh, I'm going to be trapped here for a while. I better do something." And so, people with their home offices are spontaneously finding their way to our website.
Amazing. People want to be healthy, I think. They don't want to work at it necessarily. And something like what you're offering is a nice transition, perhaps, to getting people thinking about they've got to do something about keeping their body active. And
it's a tough sell. It's a tough sell to get people to want to be healthier because, another piece of strawberry shortcake is just too enticing. But people in pain are very easy to entrain. So we get people calling us sobbing in back pain, and they want it delivered overnight. It's that kind of a deal. So we have basically two markets. There's the back pain crowd that's a very easy sell, and then there's the want to be healthier generally crowd, which are more laid back. But as an epidemiologist, it's the second group. It's the metabolic syndrome, the slow catastrophe of being overweight, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, earlier death. That's the group where we can make the biggest difference. Nobody ever died of back pain. It can be pretty debilitating, and it can ruin people's lives, and it can lead to drug addiction and maybe death that way. But the bigger threat to human health, I think, is the metabolic syndrome. But both are important, and both are addressed by moving rather than sitting still.
so, Dr. Osler, as I listen to you, for you, your legacy, you've got several legacies that you will be leaving. One is certainly looking at a healthier lifestyle, a healthier spine, really. And for you, as you started looking at legacy, what got you interested in that? A lot of people don't think about it until life is almost over, and then they begin their marketing program for what they want their legacy to be. But it's not a true legacy as such.
Well, I came to the problem of back pain organically. I had back pain. Okay, fine. And that kind of led naturally to setting up a company. And then, I had no business trying to run a company because I don't have any background in business or entrepreneurship, and I barely know how to do my tax. I don't. I get somebody else to do my taxes. So I was really a poor choice to be trying to run a company, as my 25-year-old son and partner will tell you. I've got no business doing this thing. But I really felt like it had to be done, because back pain is such an immense problem, and metabolic syndrome is even bigger. And really nobody was in the space making chairs that would solve this problem. So I thought, okay, well, either we'll do it or we will create such a ruckus that Steelcase will start doing it, or somebody will buy us out, or I don't know what. But we need to make the world aware of this catastrophe that office chairs have brought us. I go to academic ergonomic conferences because I'm comfortable in that space. I've been to so many academic conferences, and I met a guy at the Ergo Expo in Las Vegas, Nevada, a year ago, who was on the design team for the Herman Miller Aeron chair in 1994. Most popular office chair in the world. Over 8 million of them have been sold. I mean, they're expensive, and they've sold a lot of them. And so I had a spirited conversation with this guy, and he is smart and well spoken. His whole life he's been designing office chairs, and he pushed back, and because he knew a lot about but I know about epidemiology and anatomy and physiology and anthropology. And so anyway, we had a vigorous conversation and swapped email. But by the time I got back to Burlington, he'd sent me an email and he said, I feel terrible. I spent my whole life trying to make chairs so comfortable, nobody would want to get up. And now you're telling me it's been a catastrophe for people's posture and their health. But what do you want me to do? We've convinced people they can't sit without lumbar support, and now I cannot sell a chair unless it has lumbar support. The big chair is like tied to its legacy so tightly that they can't evolve. And in the meantime, we're all held hostage to the office chair. So it's really a conundrum. And we hope to just break it wide open by selling chairs that solve this problem over the web.
Dr. Osler, yeah, go ahead.
So that's what I hope the legacy will be, is that we manage to change the way people sit. There's also small ball legacy. Everybody who worked on this chair project with me initially got paid nothing. They did it just because they believed it was the right thing to do. And now, 3 years on, we're able to pay people, not nearly what they're worth, but we're able to start paying people. And my vision is that, I'm aging out of the game sooner or later, and I want to be able to hand off the company to everybody who believed in it early and worked on it hard. And that would be like my other legacy.
So isn't that interesting? We all look for a way in which we can leave something behind that has a purpose and a meaning for the next generation, or for people that are in our sphere of influence somehow. However, we don't always think carefully about, is it a constructive legacy? Sometimes we're more driven by our ego, and than we are relative to, have we left it in a better place? And that's really what I'm hearing from you, is you've used these years and years of gathering data and research to look at how do you build something so that the quality of life for the next generation is really better.
Yeah, and the next generation includes our son. So I'm deeply invested.
It's marvelous. Dr. Osler, we have talked for almost half an hour, and I just want to bring the audience up a little bit in terms of Dr. Osler has an incredible background with both in his trauma surgery background, but also with COVID. And with some of what we're going through right now with COVID, I'm going to bring him back on, and we're going to do another podcast drawing on his experience there in epidemiology, biostatistics, and also from trauma, because if you get sick, where do you go? You go to the ER, and there are trauma physicians as well as other physicians there. So just so you're aware, that will be the next piece, because it's part of our health. It's part of the legacy that Dr. Osler will be leaving for future generations of medical students and residents, physicians, and for all of us. So last thoughts before we move on and think about the next podcast that we're going to do together.
Well, I don't know. It's been swell. Thanks for letting me go off on all this. My wife will be so grateful, because tonight she won't have to listen to me talk about this stuff. We can talk about something else. I got it off my chest for today.
So the other thing for those of you who are listening is we will have information about the chair that Dr. Osler has designed. It will be in the show notes that you will be able to review. And in there will be information about how you can contact Dr. Osler and get information about the chair should you want to order it for your school, your business, your home, whatever.
Right. We have a version. We have a free version for schools. A whole other
free.
topic.
Okay, tell us quickly about that.
So the quickest description would be go to buttonchairs, buttonchairs.org, buttonchairs.org. We have a project where we give away a design that schools can make as many of active chairs as they want if they can have access to a CNC router. I did a TED talk on it. If you Google TEDx Osler, you'll find my TED talk about free chairs for schools.
Okay, perfect. So we'll get the link in the show notes for that as well. And look forward to future conversations with you, Dr. Osler. Thank you so much for being with us today on Building My Legacy podcast.
It's been fun. Thanks.
You are welcome.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.